God will avenge our death. Woe unto those who judge us falsely.
In the year 1307, on a Friday the 13th, soldiers across France broke down doors before sunrise. They dragged men from their beds, men who were, just days before, the most powerful bankers, warriors, and landowners in the Western world. By nightfall, thousands of them were in chains. Within 7 years, their leader would be burned alive on an island in the middle of the Seine River, cursing the King of France and the Pope with his dying breath. This is the story of the Knights Templar, and almost everything you think you know about them is either incomplete or wrong. Most people picture the Templars as a massive army in white robes with red crosses, but the order started with just 9 men. In the year 1119, a French knight named Hugues de Payens arrived in Jerusalem, recently captured by Christian armies during the First Crusade. The roads leading to the Holy City were unsafe. Pilgrims traveling from the coast were being robbed, kidnapped, and killed by bandits almost daily. So Hugues and 8 companions made a vow. They would protect the pilgrims, and to fund themselves, they were given headquarters on the Temple Mount, on the site believed to be the ruins of the Temple of Solomon. That's where the name comes from, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, the Knights Templar. Here's the detail most people miss. For nearly a decade, there were only about 9 of them. Not 900, 9. They had almost no funding, and legend says they were so poor that 2 knights had to share a single horse. That image, 2 knights riding 1 horse, later became the official seal of the entire order, a symbol of humility they carried even after they became the wealthiest organization in Europe. The turning point came in 1129 at the Council of Troyes. A hugely influential churchman named Bernard of Clairvaux, one of the most respected religious figures in Europe, personally endorsed the Templars and helped write their official rule, a document of over 700 clauses governing everything from prayer times to how many horses a knight could own. Bernard also wrote a piece of propaganda called In Praise of the New Knighthood, which did something radical for its time. It argued that killing in the service of God was not a sin, but a righteous act. This idea, that a warrior could also be a monk, didn't exist in mainstream Christian thought before this. The Templars essentially invented the concept of the warrior monk as an accepted Western institution. With papal backing, the order exploded. Donations of land, money, and sons poured in from noble families across Europe. And here's something most documentaries leave out. The vast majority of Templars were never knights at all. For every 1 knight in chainmail, there were roughly 10 other members, farmers, blacksmiths, shepherds, accountants, and chaplains, running the order's massive network of farms, mills, and properties. The Templars were less like an army and more like a multinational corporation with an elite special forces division. This is the part almost nobody learns in school. The Templars essentially invented modern banking. Here's the problem they solved. A nobleman in England wanted to go on crusade to the Holy Land. Carrying gold across thousands of miles of hostile territory was a death sentence. Bandits, pirates, and corrupt tax collectors were everywhere. So the Templars created a system. The nobleman would deposit his gold at a Templar house in London and receive a coded letter of credit. He could then travel, present that letter at a Templar house in Jerusalem, and withdraw the equivalent funds there, minus a fee, of course. This was, in effect, the world's first traveler's check, centuries before the concept existed anywhere else in the West. The Templars built an enormous network of fortified preceptories across Europe and the Middle East. Think of them as branch offices, and they used encrypted codes to prevent forgery. Kings borrowed money from them. The King of France used the Paris Temple as his royal treasury for a time. The Templars weren't just soldiers of God, they were the J.P. Morgan of the 12th century. Of course, the Templars did fight, and they became famous for a specific, brutal doctrine. Never retreat unless outnumbered at least 3 to 1, and never surrender, ever. A Templar knight was expected to fight to the death rather than be captured. This made them terrifying on the battlefield, but it also made them expendable in the eyes of some commanders, who would use Templar units as a hammer at the front of a charge, knowing they wouldn't break formation. The Crusades themselves were a back-and-forth struggle spanning nearly 2 centuries, and the Templars were present at almost every major battle, some glorious victories and some catastrophic defeats, including the disastrous Battle of Hattin in 1187, where the Muslim leader Saladin's forces crushed the Crusader army and executed captured Templars on the spot, since Saladin considered them too dangerous and too fanatical to ransom or release. By 1291, the last major Crusader stronghold, the city of Acre, fell. The Templars fought a desperate final defense, and the order essentially lost its original purpose. They no longer had a Holy Land to protect, but they still had their European network, their farms, their castles, and above all, their money. This is where the story turns dark, and where politics, not religion, takes over. King Philip IV of France was deeply in debt, partly to the Templars themselves, who had loaned him enormous sums, including funds he needed to pay a war ransom and to fund his own household. Philip had already expelled the Jewish population of France and confiscated their wealth, and he had also debased the French currency, causing riots. He needed money, and he needed it badly. The Templars, meanwhile, owned roughly 9,000 properties across Europe by some estimates, answered directly to the Pope rather than to any king, and paid no taxes to local rulers. To a king drowning in debt, they looked less like allies and more like a threat sitting on a mountain of untouchable gold. On Friday, October 13, 1307, Philip made his move. He had secretly prepared sealed orders sent to his officials across France weeks in advance to be opened simultaneously. At dawn, royal soldiers arrested every Templar they could find in a single coordinated sweep, an operation on a scale almost unheard of for the era. The charges were shocking: heresy, spitting on the cross during secret initiation rites, worshipping an idol called Baphomet, and engaging in obscene practices during private ceremonies. Under brutal torture, and torture was standard procedure in these interrogations, many Templars, including the Grand Master himself, Jacques de Molay, confessed to some of these charges. Many later retracted their confessions, insisting they had only said what their torturers wanted to hear. Modern historians largely agree the charges were fabricated, or at minimum, wildly exaggerated, as a pretext to seize Templar assets and eliminate Philip's debt in one stroke. Pope Clement V, who was himself heavily pressured by the French crown, initially resisted, but eventually caved. At the Council of Vienne in 1312, he formally dissolved the order, not because he was convinced of their guilt, but largely to avoid a full-blown political crisis with the King of France. And this is where the popular legend comes from: the belief that Friday the 13th became an unlucky date because of the mass arrest of the Templars. Historians actually debate this. The superstition around Friday the 13th as unlucky doesn't appear clearly in written records until centuries later, in the 1800s and 1900s. So the connection is likely a modern legend layered on top of a real historical event, rather than the true origin. But it's a fascinating piece of folklore that keeps getting repeated as fact. In March of 1314, after years in prison, Jacques de Molay was brought out to a public platform on an island in the Seine River in Paris. He had originally confessed under torture, but at the very end, he publicly retracted everything, declaring the charges false and the confessions coerced. For this act of defiance, he was sentenced to death by burning at the stake, along with another senior Templar. Legend holds that as the flames rose around him, de Molay cursed both King Philip and Pope Clement, declaring they would both meet God within the year to answer for this injustice. The strange part? Pope Clement V died just 1 month later. King Philip IV died before the year was even out, in a hunting accident. Whether this was a genuine premonition, a coincidence, or a legend invented after the fact to make the ending more dramatic, we'll never know for certain, but it's one of history's most oddly specific coincidences. Here's a fact that surprises people. The vast majority of Templar wealth wasn't secretly hidden away by escaping knights. Most of it was legally transferred, by papal order, to a rival military order, the Knights Hospitaller, who absorbed much of the Templars' property across Europe. But not everywhere. In Portugal, King Denis simply rebranded the local Templars into a brand new organization called the Order of Christ. Same buildings, similar structure, different name. This order later funded Portugal's Age of Exploration. Prince Henry the Navigator himself served as its head, and Templar-style crosses appeared on the sails of Portuguese exploration ships for over a century afterward, including, according to tradition, on the ships of Vasco da Gama. As for the famous legends, a hidden Templar treasure, a fleet that vanished from the port of La Rochelle days before the arrest, refugee knights fleeing to Scotland and helping found Freemasonry. These make for great documentaries, but there is little solid historical evidence for any of them. Most professional historians treat them as romantic myths that grew centuries after the order's actual dissolution, fueled by the genuine mystery surrounding how quickly and violently such a powerful institution was destroyed. In under 200 years, the Knights Templar went from 9 impoverished men guarding a mountain road to the most powerful financial institution in the Western world, and then were erased almost overnight by the very kings and popes they had once served and financed. Their true legacy isn't a hidden treasure or a secret bloodline. It's something more interesting. They were the first people in Western history to prove that an idea, protection, faith, and financial trust could be more powerful and more dangerous than an army. If you enjoyed this, subscribe for more deep dives into the history they never taught you in school.